Well, good afternoon. I am here today with Susie Grigoryan. Susie's an amazing estate planning attorney that I've recently gotten to know, and I'm excited about having a productive conversation with Susie about the world of estate planning, since it's somewhat misunderstood, I would say, or let's just say a lot of people are just not aware of why it's important. So we're going to cover a lot of really good ground today, and I thought we'd start with just having Susie introduce herself and tell you a little bit about her and her background.
Sounds good. Hello. Yeah. I'm an estate planning attorney. I have a bachelor's degree in finance, which is pretty unusual for attorneys, I would say. I went to Chapman University for law school. I've been practicing for about a little over 6 years. I spent the early years of my work as an attorney doing civil litigation, but frankly, my passion was really not in civil litigation in the long run. My favorite aspect of being an attorney is actual counseling, where I sit down with clients one-on-one, which is what I do all the time in estate planning, and that's why I love it. Around the time when the pandemic rolled around, I started really thinking, what do I want to do for the long run? So estate planning had always been super, super interesting to me. And finance, I think having a background in finance is such a great foundation for me in estate planning. I really learned everything from the ground up, which I think it says a lot about what I know in estate planning. When you learn everything from the ground up, you do everything yourself rather than walking into a law firm and having people hold your hand. I did everything on my own. I've learned everything. I've had amazing mentors and just been growing ever since I started working in estate planning.
That's awesome.
I also love meeting with different clients. I love learning about everyone's backgrounds. Everyone has such an interesting and fun family dynamic. I love learning about people.
That's the best part about being in the people business, isn't
yes,
it?
it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. So I really look forward to my first meeting and then the follow-ups where I learn more about people. And the more I learn about people, I can also give them advice on, maybe you might want to think about doing this or that with your trust, and maybe we can structure it a little bit differently as opposed to somebody else whose trust I did maybe a few weeks ago.
Right.
So
creativity.
Yes.
Most people aren't aware that they need to think about having an estate plan.
Yes.
Let's talk about the difference between having one and not having one.
Sure. Okay, first I want to address what you said a little earlier before I get into that, which is, why do people want to have an estate planning portfolio? It's a gift for your family is really what it is. After you're gone, it's going to feel like a gift for them, because you're taking away all the headache, all the heartache of trying to figure out where everything is supposed to land after you've passed away. When you don't have a trust in place, or when you only have a will in place even, all of your assets, everything goes through probate. Probate means that the court has to help decide where everything is supposed to go. The court is the one administering the assets rather than an attorney sitting with your family and doing it in a private setting.
So basically, even if number one son is told by mom, who's got a really ironclad will, you're my number one son, I'm leaving everything to you. If number three son, if there's no trust in place,
yeah,
then number three son can fight tooth and nail, and it's up to the courts to decide how it's all going to be dispersed.
The court's definitely going to have a big say in it.
And how long does that process take?
It could take as long as a year, 2
sometimes
years,
more,
sometimes longer. Yeah, it depends on everyone's unique situation.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention, it's public. When it goes through probate, it's public.
Sure.
So that's not something that should be minimized. It's a big deal. You want to keep family affairs private.
Mm-hmm.
Go to a trust admin attorney's office and sit down together and have a private conversation and have it all figured out that way.
Yep. Do you find sometimes that you have to pull teeth to get people to think about what all their assets are to make sure that they're all included in that trust? Like, I think sometimes people overlook the collectible car or the CD.
Actually, in my case, it has not been too tough because I have a little, I guess a homework packet is what you can call it. Some clients fill it out before their first meeting with me. Some of them fill it out with me at the first meeting, and it addresses every single category of assets possible.
Great.
So
everything goes in there.
Yeah, so it's like a little light bulb goes off in their head. And when I bring up the category of assets, and I also bring up examples as I'm asking the questions, and suddenly they're saying, oh, there's this one investment account that I forgot to put in here. Let's add that in there. And also the fact that the estate planning process is a process, right? It's over a period of time that we prepare a rough draft and we review it together. Sometimes people come to me and say, oh, there's something that I forgot. At the last meeting, I didn't remember it, but now I remember it. Let's add it.
I just had a situation recently with a family that's looking to settle the family trust, and the father, who's now deceased, had gone to the bank and opened a CD on his own, didn't tell the bank didn't ask, do you have a trust? So now he's gone and it's in his name solely, and the attorney's saying, sorry, that money is going to have to go through probate.
Yes.
And it's a lot.
Unfortunately, that's how it works. Yeah.
One of the things I find myself doing in every transaction, whenever I'm helping an individual or a family purchase, first question I ask is, do you have a trust? To make sure that the property goes into the trust.
Yes.
More times than not, they don't already have a trust in place. And I get the question, why is it important for me to have my primary residence in a trust?
You don't want it to go through probate. That's the number one reason. Also, number two, what is your family's goal with that house? Some people that have, let's say, 2 or 3 kids, have one of the kids that really wants to move into that house later. It might make sense to set up a trust in a way where the house is going to go to that one child and everything else will equally be distributed to the other kids because they don't necessarily care for the house. And then the other thing is that when assets go through probate, specifically we're talking about real property here, probate is an expensive process because you're not only does the probate attorney have to be paid, but you also have all the people in probate court. So, the judge, people working in administrative positions, you have appraisals that need to be done. All of that costs money. And you cut through that. Trust administration also costs something because someone has to do it. But it's much less than what probate would cost.
I had an estate planning and probate attorney recently say to me, I love probate because my fees are higher.
Yeah. And that's true. That's true.
Yeah, I've heard it can be as much as $30,000 or $40,000,
depending on the estate size. Yeah. There's also something called step-up in basis. The way step-up in basis works, and just to make it easier to understand, I'm going to use really simple numbers. So let's say a couple of parents bought a property for, let's just say, $100,000, and that property appreciated to $500,000 right around the time that both of them have passed away. So the step up in basis makes it so that the cost basis of the $100,000 is matched at the time that they pass away. So that, let's say the kids want to sell the property, you're going to not be paying the capital gains taxes from $100,000 to $500,000.
Right.
Also, there are situations where if the property is within the trust, it's written who it's going to pass down to, there are also opportunities to avoid having property taxes come up, right? Because if a property is sold, if it's forced to be sold, then property taxes have to come up too.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So you could save on property taxes too in that situation.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I actually had a client situation recently where the property appraised at death. Well, it was purchased 40 years earlier at $700,000, and it appraised for $3.4 million at time of death. And when it actually sold 1 year later, it sold for $3.3 million. So with that loss plus the closing costs, the beneficiaries actually had their own benefit of that in their taxes.
That's great.
I know we're getting off topic.
Yeah. It tends to happen in these conversations, right? Because there's so many interesting things to learn about in estate planning.
Yep.
Especially with real property.
What's the difference between revocable and irrevocable?
Is oh shoot.
Oh, it's okay. It's gone now.
Was it in my hair?
No, but
Revocable means changeable, and irrevocable means that you can no longer make any changes with it. Most people will get a revocable living trust during their lifetimes, and revocable means you can put things in your trust and you can also take them out.
right.
That's the great thing about a trust. And it also, the trust functions with your social security number during your lifetime. So in essence, nothing has really changed in terms of a tax perspective
Okay.
with a revocable living trust. Irrevocable means that you can't make changes. Irrevocable also means that you no longer have control over the assets in an irrevocable trust.
So why would you want to
Okay.
create one of those?
Some people prepare irrevocable trusts in order to do some, really strong asset protection over certain assets that might be worth it. But I always ask people, do you want to lose control over that asset? For example, let's say if you put a certain house in an irrevocable trust, that means that you can no longer use it for anything else, like in terms of financially, I mean. You can still live in it, but you can no longer use the equity for anything. You can't sell it. You can't really do anything to it. Some people think that it's worth it though, because in the estate planning world, when you have control over an asset, that means that creditors also have control over that asset as much as you do. When I say control, I mean more like access. They can tap into, if there's money in something, they can tap into it. Or like, let's say you get sued, right? And you have to pay out a lot of money in that lawsuit, then that lawsuit could potentially tap into the assets that are not in an irrevocable trust. But you don't want to use an irrevocable trust in every instance to protect your assets. I always tell people, make sure you have good insurance in place. Have good insurance, and then consider getting a really big umbrella policy to cover it, because
Right.
it would be a very big headache for you to have assets locked up in an irrevocable trust, and then your life circumstances change. Suddenly you need to use those assets and you can't anymore.
Right.
Your hands are tied.
Do you typically find people establishing a trust when they do make that home purchase, or are you seeing couples and families do their planning a lot sooner than that? Because I happen to know it's people are buying homes later in life now.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the one thing that I've noticed is the most common reason for people to come to me for estate planning is because they're already going through probate with somebody else.
Oh, sure.
So they felt
Oh,
the pain
gosh.
of probate. They've seen how terrible it is, what a big headache it is, and how uncomfortable the whole process is. So they're saying, for example, it could be parents that are going through it with their own parents and now have adult children, and they're saying, I don't want my kids to go through this. I'm going through it. It's enough. It's stopping with me. My kids are not going to go through probate in the future. So that's been the most common so far.
It's a wake-up call, sure.
Yeah.
I could absolutely see that. As a realtor, I've always been aware of how the importance of estate planning and setting up a trust. It wasn't until my own mother passed and I was able to understand what her wishes really were,
Yeah.
and how thoughtful she was in preparing that trust.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
It did feel like a gift to you, didn't it?
It did feel like a gift. Can I change my mind and remove my home from the trust in the future?
Absolutely. I guess if your life circumstances change for whatever reason, but yeah, you can remove it.
What happens to the trust and my home if I become incapacitated?
Okay.
This is a big one.
That is a big one. If you're incapacitated, what happens is in a trust, you designate an incapacity trustee. So that trustee comes in and starts making decisions on your behalf.
So all that has to be planned in advance.
Yes.
It has to be. And if it's not,
If it's not, then the court decides.
that's why it requires.
Yeah.
So this is to me, what you just described is the big difference between somebody getting a trust set up with a paralegal for $800, because I know that exists, versus
Yes.
doing proper estate planning
Yes.
and having an attorney asking the important questions through your discovery and
Yeah.
ensuring that trust truly covers
Yes.
everything.
It's necessary for everyone.
Yeah.
Another thing that people don't realize is you can choose a different person to come in when you're incapacitated, and you can choose somebody else to handle everything after you pass away. You can choose different people for everything. For example, you can say, I want this person to take care of my kids, but when it comes to the money for my kids, I want this other person to take care of the money.
When it comes to getting a family home into a trust, it's really a simple process of a quitclaim deed.
You could do quitclaim or you could do grant deed. The better option, I would
Is the
say, is
grant deed?
probably the grant deed.
Okay.
Although sometimes people might opt for the quitclaim just because it's one quick document. When you do it via grant deed, sometimes you have to do, it's like a few more steps. You have the warranty in place.
Right.
With the title insurance.
Right. How does placing a primary home in a trust impact my ability to sell or transfer the property?
It shouldn't affect
It doesn't, does it?
No.
It doesn't. And having sold many properties in trust, there are additional advisories and disclosures that are required as part of the real estate transaction. Usually the title company and escrow require a copy of the trust just to confirm that who is signing is the only necessary party. And
exactly.
Yeah, but it's pretty straightforward. What other estate planning documents or strategies should I consider in conjunction with placing my primary home in a trust?
Oh, I love this question.
Thank you.
Because people think that it's just the trust. It's not just the trust. There's so many other documents that you need. So there's the trust. You still need a pour-over will.
Okay.
Because the pour-over will functions like a safety net.
Okay.
And then you have your power of attorney, the financial durable power of attorney, which is basically who is going to come in and make decisions on my behalf when it comes to my finances. You have the California Advanced Healthcare Directive, which is the healthcare agent who comes in and makes decisions for me when it comes to my healthcare if I can't. And then you have the HIPAA authorization, which is essentially who can go and request medical records on my behalf if I can't. And then you also have guardianship forms for people that have minor kids. That is the majority of the documents. There could be some other things for, different circumstances, but I would say those are on average the documents that I do for everybody.
And if you're adding, if you're putting assets into a trust like jewelry or art, how does that get recorded? It just gets named in the trust.
It gets named in your personal property memorandum, which is within the trust, the estate planning portfolio.
Yeah, isn't it interesting because items like that as property, as personal property, don't have a deed.
If you don't fill out, let's say, a personal property memorandum, which is, you put one asset or one item and then you put who it's going to go to, then your trust essentially says whoever the beneficiaries are will all receive all of my personal property, and then they can decide within themselves who gets what. But you could save them that headache too.
By naming it individually.
Yes, you can name items individually however you'd like, and you can choose who each specific item is going to go to.
That gets fun with people with collectibles, doesn't it?
Yeah. Some people actually pass on their assets before or those specific items before they pass away.
That happens a lot.
And you can do that.
Sure. So Susie, what makes you different? What makes you different than other estate planning attorneys?
I think that I'm very personable.
Yes, you are.
I love having one-on-one conversations with people. I always have. I'm introverted by nature, which is very helpful for me because it comes naturally. I don't have to, I let the conversation flow naturally. And it's worked out great so far because people end up opening up very easily with me. I open up about myself with them.
Sure.
I tell them what I have in my own trust. You know, how my husband and I made decisions about our son, because it's a personal relationship that I'm building with people. It's not just papers that I'm preparing for people.
Of course.
So I like for people to know about me as well when I'm getting to know them.
I assume that there's a standard fee structure for how estate planning goes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Somewhat. So there
I'm sure
there's a
variances.
general price range. It could be somewhere around like, let's say $3,000 up to like $5,000. It could be more than that, depending on how many properties people have, real property of course, because the more properties at play makes it a little bit more complicated. And then also it depends on what the family structure is like. You know, is it a blended family, meaning could the couple have been married previously, you know, and then come into this second marriage
And
with
each have their own stuff.
their own kids,
Uh-huh.
and then have one child jointly. So that changes everything.
It
In those
sure
situations,
does.
sometimes you need 2 separate trusts for each of them and then one joint trust for them to have together. So it depends on how much work is necessary. So
Fascinating.
yeah, so I don't really give a number, an amount to people when they ask how much it is. I'll give them, you know, a ballpark range.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always tell them I want it to be fair both to you and to me. I don't want you to ever overpay if it's not going to be that much work. And I don't want to, you know, get paid too little if it's going to be a lot of work for me.
Absolutely.
It has to be fair on both ends.
Sure. What else would you want to tell our world audience that I haven't covered with you so far?
Get your estate planning done.
Get it done.
Yeah.
Never too late, never too early, right?
No, definitely not.
Now, are you finding
No,
that?
you can be late.
Are you finding you can be late? Yes,
You can be late.
it's true. You can.
Yeah. Never too early is the better thing.
I was going to say, going back to the question I asked you earlier, are you finding young couples setting up that trust even before they own their first property?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. More times than not?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because
So-
there's a misconception that people have that they're like, I don't have an estate. Everybody has something. And even if you don't have a lot of assets, who do you want to make medical decisions for you if you can't? Or who do you want to make the financial decisions for you if you can't? Those are 2 big things. Just for that alone, you should have your estate planning done.
Sure.
But I will say what's nice is that younger couples are getting estate planning done more
Taking
nowadays.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's probably been a growing trend,
Yes.
and I hope it continues to grow for you and your business for sure.
Same here. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
you.
Yay.